In the heart of Maplewood, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the small town. Officer Jake Thompson cruised the familiar streets in his squad car, the engine rumbling like a beast beneath him. He had earned a notorious reputation among the townspeople. His aggressive demeanor often overshadowed any semblance of community service he might have performed. To him, law enforcement was a game of intimidation, and he played it with gusto, his jaw set in a constant scowl that warned others to stay out of his way. As he turned onto Maple Avenue, his radio crackled to life, cutting through the hum of the evening. Unit 23, we have a report of a disturbance at Riverside Park. Possible altercation between a group of teenagers. Proceed with caution. The dispatcher's voice was clipped and professional, but Jake's chest swelled with an adrenaline rush. He relished moments like these, the thrill of potential conflict, the chance to impose his version of order on what he viewed as unruly chaos. Copy that, he replied curtly, flicking on the lights and accelerating toward the park. He envisioned himself arriving like a knight in shining armor, ready to restore peace with a firm hand. The thought of facing down a group of rowdy teens excited him, his bravado leading the way as he mentally prepared for the confrontation. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss any of our updates. Your support helps us bring you the best content possible. Continuing, meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Marcus Johnson stood before a small gathering in the community center. As the newly elected mayor of Maplewood and the first black man to hold the office, he felt the weight of his role more than ever. Surrounded by concerned citizens, he spoke passionately about the need for improved relations between the police and the community. His voice resonated with conviction as he outlined plans for community outreach programs and police accountability initiatives. We can't continue to live in fear of those sworn to protect us, Marcus urged, his eyes scanning the room filled with nodding heads and furrowed brows. We need to work together to build trust. Our town deserves better than the fear and division that has plagued us for too long. Absolutely, an older woman exclaimed from the back. We need to hold them accountable. They can't just do whatever they want. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Marcus felt a surge of hope. He was determined to change the narrative in Maplewood, to be a beacon of progress in a town that had seen its share of darkness. But as he wrapped up the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that his efforts might be met with resistance from those who preferred the status quo. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus stepped outside into the cool evening air, the lingering warmth of the sun giving way to the chill of night. He walked toward Riverside Park, his mind racing with thoughts about the discussions he had just led. Perhaps he could organize a community picnic there soon, an event designed to foster unity. The park had always been a hub for youth activity, and he envisioned it as a place for healing. As he approached the park, he noticed a group of teenagers gathered near the basketball court. They laughed and joked, tossing a ball between them, their carefree energy palpable. Marcus smiled. This was what he wanted to see, young people engaged in positive activities. But before he could reach them, a squad car pulled up with a screech, the familiar blue and white flashing lights cutting through the dusk. Jake Thompson stepped out of the vehicle, his posture rigid and authoritative, the air around him charged with tension. He surveyed the scene, his expression hardening as he perceived the group of teenagers not as kids enjoying a game, but as potential troublemakers. He had made up his mind before even stepping out of the car, and now he approached with an aggressive stride, ready to assert his dominance. "Hey, what's going on here?" Jake barked, his voice booming across the park. The laughter died down, and all eyes turned to him. "Just playing some ball, officer," one of the teenagers replied, raising his hands defensively, as if trying to signal that they meant no harm. "Playing ball? Huh? You sure it doesn't look like you're up to no good?" Jake's tone dripped with skepticism, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the group. He took another step forward, puffing out his chest as if to intimidate them further. "Come on, man, we're just having fun," another teen chimed in, his voice tinged with nervousness. But Jake wasn't interested in their explanation. He was on a mission, and he relished the power he wielded as an officer. I don't want to see any trouble tonight. You get that? The tension in the air thickened as Marcus stepped closer, sensing the impending confrontation. Officer Thompson, he called out, his voice steady but firm. They're just playing a game. There's no need for this. Jake turned abruptly, his gaze hardening as he fixed it on Marcus. And who the hell are you to tell me how to do my job? He snapped, his voice laced with disdain. Mr. Johnson, a teenager whispered to his friend, recognizing the mayor. That's the new guy. The group fell silent, their eyes darting between the two men as the atmosphere crackled with tension. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. I'm the mayor of this town, officer. I believe in community engagement, not confrontation. We should be encouraging these kids, not scaring them. Engagement? That's rich coming from someone who thinks he can come in and change everything. Jake shot back, his voice full of contempt. You don't know what it's like out here. You think you can just waltz in and make friends with everyone? Newsflash. It doesn't work that way. Actually, it does, Marcus replied, his tone unwavering. But only if we all choose to work together. I'm trying to create a better Maplewood for everyone, including the police. Better for who? Jake sneered, stepping closer, invading Marcus's personal space. You're just another politician with a fancy title, thinking you can tell me what to do. I'll handle things my way. As the words hung heavy in the air, Marcus felt an unsettling chill run down his spine. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he knew he had to act fast to de-escalate it. I'm not here to dictate how you do your job, Jake. I'm here to support our community. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be. But Jake's eyes were glazed with a mix of anger and stubbornness. You're just another troublemaker in my way. He spat, the tension between them thick as a storm cloud ready to burst. Marcus could feel the hostility radiating from the officer, a warning of the storm that was about to break. Just then, the sounds of the park faded away, and it felt as though the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. The mayor trying to bridge a gap, and the officer determined to keep it wide. The standoff was palpable, and the teenagers stood by, uncertain of what would happen next. The evening shadows deepened around them, wrapping the park in an unease that neither man could shake. In that moment, the battle lines were drawn, and the future of Maplewood hung precariously in the balance, waiting for the next move amidst the tension simmering just beneath the surface. The air was thick with tension as Officer Jake Thompson stepped out of his cruiser, the blue and white lights still flashing behind him, casting an eerie glow on the park's pavement. His reputation preceded him. He was known in Maplewood for his no-nonsense approach, but lately, that had morphed into something more sinister. As he approached the group of teenagers, his eyes narrowed, picking out Marcus Johnson, the new mayor, standing at the center of the gathering. Marcus was engaged in a conversation, trying to mediate between the teens, who were simply enjoying a summer evening. What's going on here? Jake barked, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a knife. The teenagers fell silent, shifting uneasily under his scrutinizing gaze. Marcus turned, his expression calm but firm. Officer Thompson, everything's fine. We're just having a conversation, Marcus replied, his tone measured as he stepped forward, attempting to bridge the gap between the officer and the group. Fine? It looks like you're inciting trouble. Mayor, Jake shot back, his voice dripping with disdain. The badge on his chest felt like a shield against any challenge, and he relished the power it gave him. You shouldn't be encouraging these kids to hang around in the park after dark. Encouraging? No one is encouraging anything, Jake. They're just talking, Marcus said, his frustration beginning to show. You know these kids. They're not doing anything wrong. Maybe you don't know what trouble looks like, but I do, Jake replied, stepping closer, his body tense and ready for confrontation. You're making it worse by being here. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. I was just discussing ways to improve our community, how we can work together. This is part of that. Work together? Jake scoffed, crossing his arms. You think talking is going to fix anything? You're just making excuses for them. The murmurs from the crowd began to grow louder, as onlookers pulled out their phones, capturing the scene unfolding before them. They could sense the rising tension, the potential for conflict hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Marcus, ever the diplomat, attempted to defuse the situation. "Jake, I'm not here to challenge your authority. I want to promote understanding and peace. Isn't that what we should all want?" Marcus said, trying to maintain eye contact, hoping to reach the officer's humanity. But Jake's expression hardened, as if he were unable to hear the reason in Marcus's words. "You're just a politician trying to save face. You're out here with these kids, and it looks bad. You should be setting an example, not trying to be their friend." Marcus felt a surge of anger but pushed it down. "I'm not trying to be their friend. I'm trying to help them. We need to build trust in this community. And that starts with conversations, not confrontations." Jake's face twisted in disdain at the mention of trust. "Trust? You think they'll respect you more because you're playing nice? They need to learn discipline. You're just making it easier for them to think they can do whatever they want." Before Marcus could respond, Jake advanced, invading his personal space, his voice lowering to a dangerous growl. "You're out of your depth, Mayor. You think you can come in here and change things? You don't know what it's like to really police these streets." In that moment, the crowd held its breath, the tension palpable. Marcus's heart raced, but he refused to back down. "I may not know what it's like to wear that uniform, but I know what it's like to be treated unfairly. I know the struggles of our community, and I'm here to represent them," he said firmly, his voice unwavering. Then, without warning, everything escalated. In a shocking display of aggression, Jake lunged forward, throwing a punch that connected squarely with Marcus's jaw. The sound echoed in the stunned silence that followed, a brutal punctuation to their conflict. Marcus stumbled backward, crashing to the ground, shock written across his face. Gasps erupted from the crowd as bystanders raised their phones, recording the incident. The atmosphere shifted from one of tension to outright outrage, disbelief coursing through the onlookers. Whispers filled the air, and Marcus lay on the pavement, struggling to understand what had just happened. Did he really just hit him? One witness murmured, disbelief etched on her features. "He's the mayor. What is wrong with that guy?" Another voice shouted, anger rising in the crowd. From his position on the ground, Marcus could feel the heat of the crowd's anger and disbelief. The world around him felt surreal, the chaos of the moment blurring with the shock of the assault. He raised a hand to his face, feeling the sting of the impact, mixed with the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Get up, Marcus. Don't let him do this to you," someone shouted from the crowd, and another voice chimed in, "We won't stand for this." Slowly, Marcus pushed himself off the ground, his body shaking, not just from the physical blow but from the realization of how far things had gone. He looked into the faces of those gathered around him, their expressions a mixture of concern and fury. "Is this what we've come to?" Marcus called out, his voice steadier than he felt. "Is this what we want our town to represent? Violence instead of dialogue?" Jake, still standing with his fists clenched, seemed momentarily taken aback by the crowd's reaction. He scanned their faces, and for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. But pride and arrogance quickly replaced it. As he stepped forward, chest puffed out. "I was doing my job. You all saw him provoking me. You were out of line." "Jake," someone yelled from the back of the crowd. "You assaulted the mayor. You're supposed to protect us, not attack us." The outcry grew louder, and Marcus felt a surge of strength from the support of his community. He straightened up, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip with the back of his hand. "This is not how we solve our problems. We need to hold each other accountable, and that includes you, Officer Thompson." Jake's face twisted in anger, but now he was outnumbered, his bravado wavering in the face of the community's outrage. The crowd began to close in around Marcus, their collective energy shifting, turning into a force that even Jake couldn't ignore. "Let's go, Jake. You've made your point." One of the officers who had been watching stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "This isn't the place for this." But Jake stood his ground, glaring at Marcus as if challenging him to make the next move. "You think this is over?" You think you can just stand there and preach to me?" he spat, his voice laced with venom. Marcus took a deep breath, meeting Jake's gaze squarely. "No, but I'm not going to let you intimidate me or this community. We deserve better than this. We deserve to be treated with respect." The crowd erupted into applause, their support unmistakable. Jake's expression faltered, the realization of his actions washing over him. He turned on his heel and walked back to his cruiser, his confidence shattered, leaving the crowd buzzing with disbelief and anger over what had just transpired. As the adrenaline began to fade, Marcus felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: anger, confusion, and a determination that burned brighter than ever. He knew this was just the beginning of a long fight, one that would require all the strength and support of his community. But for now, he had to gather his thoughts and find a way to turn this moment into a catalyst for change. News of the brutal altercation between Officer Jake Thompson and Mayor Marcus Johnson spread through Maplewood like wildfire. The incident that had occurred just hours earlier quickly became the focal point of social media, igniting a firestorm of outrage and disbelief. Hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #PoliceBrutality began trending, with citizens sharing videos, thoughts, and calls for accountability. The footage of Marcus lying on the ground, bloodied and confused, became emblematic of a larger issue: a community grappling with the stark realities of racism and police violence. In the coming hours, a group of Marcus's supporters gathered at the town square, their faces a mix of anger and determination. The chatter was loud, punctuated by the occasional chant demanding justice. Signs were hastily made, reading phrases like "No justice," "No peace," and "We stand with Marcus." Among the crowd, old friends and new allies found common ground, united in their support for their newly elected mayor. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the square, the atmosphere grew electric. "Can you believe what happened?" a young woman exclaimed, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "This isn't just about Marcus. It's about all of us." A man beside her nodded, his brow furrowed. "It's about time we hold these officers accountable. They think they can do whatever they want without consequences." As the crowd swelled, a local activist stepped up to the makeshift podium, raising her voice above the din. "We can't let this go unnoticed. We have to demand justice not just for Marcus, but for everyone who has faced this kind of violence at the hands of those sworn to protect us." Cheers erupted, and the crowd responded with chants of solidarity, their voices echoing off the nearby buildings. The energy was palpable, a communal resolve igniting a sense of purpose among the supporters. They would not let this incident fade into obscurity. Justice would be sought. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Officer Jake Thompson sat at his desk, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The atmosphere was tense, and whispers filled the air, punctuated by the occasional scowl from his colleagues. Jake had always prided himself on being tough, a protector of the law, but today he was feeling the backlash of his actions. "Did you see the footage?" one of the officers muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "You really messed up, Jake." Jake gritted his teeth, his jaw tense. "I was just doing my job. That guy was acting suspiciously. He was inciting those kids. I had to take control of the situation." "Control? You call that control?" Another officer shot back, disbelief etched on his face. "You assaulted the mayor. You've crossed a line." Jake's defiance flared. "He was asking for it. You didn't see what I saw. You're all just turning against me because of who he is. This isn't about race. It's about law and order." But deep down, uncertainty gnawed at him. The mounting pressure from his colleagues and the community weighed heavily on his conscience. He had always believed he was above reproach, but now he was under scrutiny, and the realization began to sink in that he might not escape the consequences of his actions. As the evening progressed, Marcus sat in his living room, nursing his injuries, his mind racing. He replayed the confrontation over and over, struggling to process the aggression he had faced. The pain from the punch throbbed on his cheek, but it was the emotional scars that were deeper. He had fought hard to earn the trust of the community, and now he felt as if he had betrayed them by being assaulted in such a public manner. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Sarah, his attorney and a fierce advocate for justice. She stepped inside, a look of concern etched on her face. "Marcus, I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" she asked, her tone serious yet warm. "I'll be fine," he replied, trying to downplay the severity of the situation. "But we need to talk about what happened today." Sarah nodded, taking a seat across from him. "I agree. This isn't just about you. It's about sending a message that this kind of behavior cannot be tolerated." Marcus let out a heavy sigh, leaning back in his chair as he looked at Sarah. "I want to take legal action against Thompson. He needs to be held accountable for what he did." "Absolutely," Sarah said, her eyes brightening with determination. "We can file a civil suit for assault, but we need to gather evidence and witnesses. The more support we have from the community, the stronger our case will be." Marcus nodded, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within him. He had spent years fighting for equality and justice, and now it was time to channel that energy into something tangible. "I'm ready to fight this, not just for me, but for everyone who has faced this kind of violence. We can't let this go unchallenged." Sarah smiled, her resolve matching his. "I'll start gathering evidence and reaching out to witnesses. We'll also need to organize a press conference to get the word out. The community needs to know what happened." As they discussed the details, Marcus felt a surge of empowerment. He was no longer just a victim. He was a leader standing up against injustice. The pain from his injuries would not deter him. Instead, it fueled his resolve to make a change. He was determined to ensure that what happened to him would not be swept under the rug. Hours later, the night wore on, but Marcus and Sarah continued to strategize, laying the groundwork for what would become a pivotal moment in Maplewood's history. The fight for justice was just beginning, and with each passing minute, they grew more convinced that their battle would resonate beyond their small town, inspiring others to stand against the tide of injustice and inequality. Meanwhile, in the shadows cast by the streetlights, the community remained restless, united by their outrage and determination. The events of that day would not be forgotten. A storm was brewing in Maplewood, one that would challenge the status quo and demand accountability. As the night deepened, the collective voice of a community rose, echoing the sentiment that change was not only necessary but inevitable. The town hall meeting was set to begin at 6 o'clock, but the line of residents snaked around the building long before. The energy in the air was thick with tension, anticipation, and a shared sense of urgency. Inside, the atmosphere was charged as community members gathered, their faces a mix of anger, confusion, and determination. Marcus Johnson, the newly elected mayor, took center stage, his heart racing as he prepared to address the crowd. He stood at the podium, the bright lights illuminating his determined expression. Behind him, a banner read, "Justice for Marcus." The room was packed, and murmurs filled the air, each voice echoing the collective outrage over the recent incident involving Officer Jake Thompson. As the murmurs quieted, Marcus cleared his throat, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Marcus began, his eyes scanning the crowd filled with familiar faces. "Friends, family, and supporters. We are here because we cannot remain silent any longer. What happened to me is not just an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a much larger issue. We need to address the systemic racism and brutality that plague our community." A round of applause erupted, and Marcus felt a surge of encouragement. He continued, his voice rising with passion. "We need reform. We need accountability. But most importantly, we need healing. Healing for our community, for our police force, and for the relationships that have been broken." From the back of the room, a voice called out, "What are we going to do about Officer Thompson?" The crowd erupted with agreement, their sentiments echoing the frustration that had been building since the incident. Marcus raised a hand for silence. "I understand your anger. I share it. But we must focus on constructive dialogue. We need to come together, not only to demand justice but to create a better future for our children." As he spoke, he could see the faces of the audience. Some nodded in agreement, while others wore expressions of skepticism. He knew there were deep-seated fears and wounds that needed addressing. He took a deep breath, channeling his energy into a vision of unity. Let's channel our outrage into action. Let's work together to create a community where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. We can't do it alone. We need each other, Marcus urged, his tone firm yet inviting. The applause grew louder, echoing off the walls. But before he could continue, a familiar figure stepped into the room. Officer Jake Thompson, his face tight with defiance, had arrived. A mix of gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. Marcus felt a wave of unease wash over him, but he stood his ground, his gaze locked on Jake. "Thompson," someone shouted from the audience. "Get out of here!" Jake, undeterred by the hostility, strode to the front, his presence commanding. "I'm here to speak," he declared, his voice booming over the crowd. "I have a right to defend myself." The crowd erupted with boos and jeers, but Jake raised a hand, demanding silence. "You don't understand the full story. What I did was in the line of duty. I was protecting the community." "Protecting?" Marcus interjected, his voice steady. "You attacked me. You assumed I was a criminal because of the color of my skin." Jake's expression hardened. "You were inciting a disturbance. I was trying to help the community." Marcus shot back, his frustration boiling over. "You don't get to use your badge as a shield for your prejudice. You need to take responsibility for your actions." The tension in the room escalated, palpable and electric. The crowd was split. Some shouted in agreement with Marcus, while others felt compelled to defend Jake, caught in the crossfire of a complicated situation. "I'm not the only one who feels this way," Jake continued, his voice rising above the chaos. "There are good cops out there who risk their lives every day, and this is how you repay us? With hate? Good cops don't act like you did." A woman in the front shouted back. "You don't get to play the victim here." The heated exchange continued, each side unwilling to back down. Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was more than just a personal confrontation. It was a reflection of the deep-rooted issues that plagued their town, and he could sense the community on the brink of something larger. As the shouting escalated, Marcus took a deep breath and raised his hands again, signaling for calm. "We need to focus on the facts, on what happened, and on how we can move forward. I don't want this to turn into a spectacle. We owe it to ourselves and to this community to have a real discussion." Slowly, the room quieted, the crowd still simmering with emotion. Jake stood firm, his gaze locked on Marcus, a mixture of anger and defensiveness swirling in his eyes. Marcus could feel the tension between them, a battle of wills unfolding on the public stage. "Let's allow each other to speak," Marcus proposed, turning to Jake. "You can share your side, but I want honesty. The people deserve the truth." Jake hesitated, the crowd watching him closely. "Fine, but let's not pretend I'm the only one at fault here. This community needs to take a good look in the mirror too." "That's fair," Marcus replied, swallowing his frustration. "But make no mistake, your actions have consequences. We need to address the culture of fear and aggression that exists within our police force." Jake's jaw clenched, and for a moment, he looked vulnerable, as if the weight of his choices was beginning to settle on him. "I did what I thought was right in that moment," he said, his voice quieter now, almost shaky. "But maybe I could have handled it differently. I don't know." The crowd shifted, some faces softening at Jake's admission, while others remained skeptical. Marcus seized the moment. "That's a start, Jake. Acknowledgement is the first step toward change. But we need more than words. We need action." Just then, a young man from the back shouted, "What's the plan? What are we going to do about this?" Marcus turned to the crowd, feeling their energy shift. "We need to come together and create a task force that includes community members and police officers to review training protocols and ensure accountability. We need to listen to each other, to understand the experiences and fears of every individual in this town." As Marcus spoke, he could see the crowd beginning to nod in agreement, a sense of unity forming in their shared purpose. Jake, however, remained on the edge, caught between his instinct to defend his actions and the growing pressure to accept responsibility. "I'll think about it," Jake finally said, his voice subdued. "But I can't promise anything." "Thinking isn't enough," a voice called out. "We need commitment." The discussion continued, voices rising and falling in passionate debate. Marcus stood tall, fueled by the weight of his position as mayor and the responsibility he felt toward his community. He knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but this meeting was a crucial first step. As the night wore on, the crowd slowly began to disperse, conversations lingering in the air. Marcus felt a sense of cautious optimism. They had begun to bridge the gap, to confront the painful realities that had long been ignored. Outside, the evening air was cool and crisp. Marcus stepped out of the building, his mind racing with thoughts of what had transpired. He glanced back at the gathering of residents, their faces illuminated by the streetlights, some still engaged in heated discussions. But a shadow loomed in the periphery. He spotted Jake lingering near his cruiser, the officer's silhouette stark against the dim light. The tension between them had not dissipated, and Marcus felt the weight of their unresolved conflict. "Jake," Marcus called out, taking a few steps closer. "We need to talk." Jake looked up, his expression a mix of wariness and uncertainty. "About what?" "About the future. About how we can work together to rebuild trust," Marcus replied, his tone earnest. "This isn't just about you or me, it's about everyone in this town. Can we find a way to move forward together?" Jake hesitated, the silence stretching between them. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Maybe we can, but it's going to take a lot of work." "I'm willing to do that work," Marcus said, hope threading through his voice. "Are you?" As the two stood there, the night air filled with the sounds of distant conversations. Both men knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for the first time, there was a flicker of possibility, a chance for dialogue, understanding, and perhaps even redemption. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the streets of Maplewood as the protests swelled, drawing in a crowd of passionate individuals demanding justice. The air was thick with tension, the chant of "No justice, no peace," echoing off the brick buildings that lined Main Street. As the crowd surged forward, holding signs that proclaimed messages of solidarity and change, a few individuals, visibly agitated, began to push against the line of police officers stationed to maintain order. Officer Jake Thompson stood among his fellow officers, his heart racing in response to the escalating emotions around him. He could feel the weight of the crowd's collective anger pressing down on him, igniting a fire of defiance within him. He had always been a man of action, and he was determined to assert his authority. As he scanned the crowd, his gaze fell upon Marcus Johnson, the newly elected mayor, who stood proudly at the forefront, rallying the people with his powerful voice. "Marcus!" Jake shouted, pushing through the throng of officers to reach him. His tone was accusatory, his expression hardened by a mix of frustration and anger. "You're inciting chaos. This is your fault." Marcus turned to face Jake, his brows furrowed in disbelief. "Jake, this isn't chaos. This is the voice of the community demanding change. You cannot silence them." The crowd around them hushed momentarily, sensing the confrontation. Marcus stood tall, his posture confident despite the tension that crackled between them. Jake's face twisted in anger, the veins in his neck bulging as he spat back. "You're stirring them up. You want them to turn against the police? You think this is going to help? Help? You think your actions helped?" Marcus's voice rose, frustration lacing his words. "You assaulted me in front of everyone. You've shown nothing but aggression and disrespect. This is about accountability." "Jake." The air grew electric as the crowd reacted, murmurs rippling through them. Some people raised their phones, capturing the moment. Jake's anger flared, and he took a step closer to Marcus, his fists clenching at his sides. "You don't understand what it's like to keep this town safe, do you? You think you can stand there and preach when you don't have a clue what it means to protect." Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "I do understand, Jake. I understand that the community deserves to feel safe, and that includes being safe from you. You're supposed to protect us, not abuse your power. Just then, a loud crash erupted from the side of the protest, drawing everyone's attention. A scuffle broke out as several agitators clashed with the police, their anger boiling over into violence. The tension escalated, shouts turning into chaos as officers struggled to regain control. Jake's focus shifted momentarily, but he quickly turned back to Marcus, his eyes blazing with fury. You think you're so high and mighty now, don't you? Mayor Marcus Johnson, the savior of Maplewood, he sneered. But you're just a puppet to them, a pawn in their game. That's where you're wrong, Jake, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. I'm not a pawn. I'm a leader. I'm here to bring this community together, not tear it apart. An unexpected silence fell over the crowd as Marcus's words hung in the air. Jake's expression shifted, uncertainty creeping into his features. What do you mean? He asked, his bravado faltering slightly. Marcus straightened his back, his voice resonating with resolve. I mean, I'm the mayor. I was elected to represent this community, to give them a voice. You're standing against that, and it's time you recognize the consequences of your actions. The crowd gasped collectively, the realization washing over them like a wave. Whispers of disbelief and astonishment rippled through the gathered protesters. Jake's jaw dropped, the anger in his eyes replaced by shock. You're the mayor? He stammered, taken aback by the revelation. Yes, I am, Marcus said, his tone unwavering. And I will not let you intimidate me or this community any longer. You may have a badge, but that does not give you the right to abuse your power. The crowd erupted into applause, their voices rising in support of Marcus. The energy shifted, the collective anger turning into a rallying cry for justice. Jake's face flushed as he realized the gravity of the situation. The people were no longer just protesting against police brutality. They were uniting behind their mayor, standing firmly against his actions. As the chaos continued to unfold around them, an uneasy silence hovered between Marcus and Jake. The officer's mind raced, grappling with the implications of his actions and the growing animosity from the community he was sworn to protect. Desperation clawed at him, and in that moment, he felt vulnerable, the weight of his choices crashing down upon him. Marcus, Jake's voice trembled slightly, a hint of fear seeping into his bravado. You don't understand what's at stake here. If this continues, it will only get worse. I understand perfectly, Marcus replied, his voice firm. You've made it worse, Jake. You've shown everyone exactly why we need change. This isn't just about me. It's about the future of this town and the people in it. Before Jake could respond, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of reinforcements. The air crackled with tension once more as officers prepared to confront the agitators. Marcus turned to the crowd, his expression resolute. We will be heard. We will fight for justice. The crowd erupted again, chanting his name, their voices rising above the chaos. Jake stood frozen, the reality of his situation sinking in. He was no longer just an officer carrying out his duties. He was a man caught in the whirlwind of his own making. The weight of his past actions loomed large over him, and for the first time, he questioned whether he would be able to escape the consequences of his choices. As the reinforcements moved in, Marcus stepped back, allowing the community to rally around him. He could feel the support surging, a wave of empowerment washing over him. He knew that this was only the beginning of a long battle, but today, they had taken a significant step forward. Jake, on the other hand, felt the walls closing in. The faces of the people he had wronged were all around him, and their voices were no longer drowned out by the sirens. They were demanding accountability, and deep down, he knew that the investigation into his past would soon reveal the depth of his misconduct. With the crowd chanting for change and justice, the confrontation had shifted irrevocably. As Marcus stood amid his supporters, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just the mayor. He was the embodiment of the community's call for justice, a beacon of hope amid the turmoil. And as Jake faced the reality of his actions, he could only watch as his authority slipped away, the truth unraveling in the wake of the protests that had ignited a fire of change in Maplewood. As the investigation into Officer Jake Thompson's actions progressed, the weight of the evidence began to mount against him. In a small, dimly lit conference room at the Maplewood Law Office, Marcus Johnson sat with his attorney, Sarah Mitchell. The walls were adorned with plaques and certificates, but the atmosphere was tense, charged with the gravity of the situation. Sarah had spread documents across the table, each one representing a piece of the larger puzzle they were trying to solve. "Here," Sarah said, sliding a stack of papers towards Marcus. "This is the evidence we've gathered from the past incidents. It's clear that Thompson has a history of racial profiling and excessive use of force." Marcus leaned in, scanning the pages filled with reports and testimonies. His heart raced as he recognized the names and stories of those who had suffered under Jake's aggressive policing. "How many cases are we talking about?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with resolve. "6 documented cases in the last 3 years alone," Sarah replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "And that's just what we could find. There may be more victims who haven't come forward. But with this evidence, we can build a solid case for assault and misconduct." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. As the first black mayor of Maplewood, he knew that this case was about more than just him. It was about justice for a community that had suffered in silence for far too long. "We need to bring this to light, Sarah. No one should have to endure what I did, and no one should live in fear of those sworn to protect them." As they continued to strategize, the atmosphere shifted. The news broke that the court hearing would take place the following week, and the community buzzed with anticipation. Flyers were distributed, urging residents to attend and support Marcus as he sought justice. The town hall, usually a place for mundane discussions, transformed into a battleground for change. On the day of the hearing, the courthouse was packed. People filled the benches, a mix of supporters and onlookers, all eager to witness the outcome of the trial that had captured the town's attention. Marcus stood at the front, flanked by Sarah and a handful of community leaders. The tension in the air was palpable as they awaited the arrival of the judge. "Do you think they'll really hold him accountable?" one of the leaders whispered to Marcus, anxiety evident in his voice. "Justice has to prevail," Marcus replied confidently. "If we don't fight for it now, when will we?" The words hung in the air, a rallying cry that resonated with those around him. When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Eleanor Grant was known for her fairness and no-nonsense approach. She took her seat, her gaze sweeping across the room before settling on the case before her. "We are here today to address the charges against Officer Jake Thompson," she announced, her voice steady and commanding. "The allegations are serious, and the evidence presented will be thoroughly examined." As the hearing unfolded, Sarah presented the evidence with clarity and passion. Each piece of testimony revealed a pattern of misconduct that painted a damning picture of Thompson's behavior. The courtroom listened intently as witnesses spoke of their encounters with the officer, their voices shaking with emotion as they recounted their experiences of fear and humiliation. "And what do you want to see happen?" Sarah asked one of the witnesses, a young black man named Elijah who had faced Thompson's wrath. "I just want to feel safe in my own town," Elijah replied, tears brimming in his eyes. "We shouldn't have to worry about being treated like criminals just because of the color of our skin." The words resonated deeply, echoing the sentiments of many in the room. Marcus could feel the collective frustration and pain of the community rising, fueling their determination for change. He watched as Sarah skillfully dismantled any defense the prosecution attempted to mount, highlighting the inconsistencies in Thompson's past reports and the racially charged language he often used. Finally, it was time for Thompson to take the stand. He entered the courtroom with an air of arrogance, his uniform pressed and his demeanor unyielding. The moment he opened his mouth to speak, the tension escalated. "Officer Thompson," Sarah began, her tone incisive, "how do you respond to the claims that you have a history of racially biased policing?" "I was just doing my job," Thompson replied, his voice defensive. "I have to make split-second decisions. Sometimes it's necessary to be tough." "Tough?" Sarah echoed, incredulity laced in her voice. "You think it was tough to punch an unarmed man in the face? Is that how you define your duty?" Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I acted in self-defense. He was being confrontational. Confrontational? Marcus interjected, standing up, unable to contain his anger. I merely asked you to calm down. You had no reason to escalate the situation. You attacked me because of the color of my skin. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the tension thickening as Marcus's words hung in the air. Judge Grant pounded her gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. Thompson's demeanor faltered, revealing a crack in his otherwise composed facade. As the hearing progressed, it became increasingly clear that the evidence was irrefutable. The judge listened intently, her expression unreadable, but Marcus could sense a shift in the atmosphere. When she finally called for a recess, the room buzzed with anticipation. After a brief interlude, the courtroom reconvened. Judge Grant returned, her expression serious. I have reviewed the evidence presented and the testimonies given. It is my responsibility to uphold the law and ensure justice is served, she stated firmly. A hush fell over the room as she continued. Officer Thompson, you are hereby charged with assault and misconduct in office. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the court finds you guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, shock and disbelief mingling in the air. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, tempered by the weight of what it meant for the community. As Thompson was led away in handcuffs, he caught Marcus's eye. For a fleeting moment, there was a flicker of something. Fear, perhaps, or realization. Once the gavel fell, Marcus stood before the crowd that had gathered outside the courthouse. The sunlight glinted off the buildings around him, illuminating the faces of those who had fought alongside him. Today we have taken a stand, he began, his voice strong and unwavering. This is just the beginning of our journey towards justice and equality. Cheers erupted from the crowd, filled with hope and determination. Marcus felt a swell of pride as he looked around at the community he loved. We must continue to advocate for change, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. Together, we will ensure that this town reflects the values of respect and dignity for all its citizens. As Marcus concluded his speech, he saw the faces of those who had suffered, those who had fought against injustice, and those who believed in a brighter future. The fight against racism and abuse of power was far from over, but today marked a significant victory. In the weeks that followed, the town of Maplewood began to heal, and Marcus dedicated himself to fostering dialogue between the community and law enforcement. He knew that true change would require sustained effort, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. As for Jake Thompson, he would face the consequences of his actions, a stark reminder of the battle against systemic racism and the importance of accountability. The community had spoken, and their voices would not be silenced. In the heart of Maplewood, a new chapter was beginning, one where justice and unity would pave the way for a brighter future. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and share it with your friends. Your comment is essential for the growth of the channel. And look at this video that appears on the screen. See you soon.